All right, folks, welcome to another edition of the Huddle. Thanks for joining me this beautiful, very hot Thursday afternoon. I hope none of us are actually having to go outside today, and air conditioning is definitely a blessing. And I don't know what the entire continent of Europe is doing. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Hey, today we're going to cover a few. We got three documents to cover, and I hopefully what we'll do is get to the bulk of our time, which is to discuss a couple of things. One is setting expectations with our clients, sellers, mostly. We will talk a little bit about that as well with buyers. But also, I want to talk about some of you didn't get to see Wasatch Front Huddle, or excuse me, Wasatch Front Sales meeting. I conducted that Tuesday. But there's some things in there I want to take a deep dive. I did share that PowerPoint screen, and there's a few slides in there I want to take a deep dive on to talk a little bit more in depth about and get some more insight on that. So that's what we're going to do today, and hopefully we'll spend a good hour and make ourselves better. All right, let's jump into it. Let's jump in and share just this stellar form for sell by owner commission agreement. And I know what you're saying. You're saying, Mike, what do we need a for sale by owner commission agreement for? It's not a bad question. And I think the obvious is, oh, well, we get this signed in for sale by owner situations, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why we do it. But some of you may be thinking, but yeah, Mike, we write our commission amounts on the rep sheet now. So what do we need this form for? I don't know that I don't know that this form is desperately needed in any way, but I think it does a few things for us. One, the for sale by owner commission agreement. It's a good way if we're going to approach a seller and we don't have any relationship with them, and obviously it's not listed. This is a good way to pre-negotiate your commissions beforehand. It is my personal opinion that that's the best way to do it. The world is not a perfect place, and so our industry has defaulted that we're now negotiating buyers' commissions in purchase contracts, but in the very specific instance in which those are listed properties and we can't advertise those amounts anymore, so we just throw them in the rep sheet and it works out great. In this instance, though, there's going to be communication with this homeowner, and we're the real estate agent, and we're going to, have the normal conversation of, hey, I got a buyer for you. Can we tour the home? Great, we can tour the home. By the way, are you willing to pay our buyer's agent fee? If the answer is yes, the next thing you should do, in my opinion, is start negotiating it. Get this document in front of them, have them sign it. Okay. I think that's a much better position for your buyer to be in than negotiating it, especially in the for sale by owner situation, than negotiating it along with your purchase contract. And there's a few things in there too that are covered, that cover you and set some expectations for the seller as well. So let's jump into it real quick. The first one, obviously, paragraph 2, that we're going to establish what our fee is. I think it's easier to establish our fee, a higher fee beforehand, though that doesn't apply every time. I think in some negotiation situations, we may have more leverage to negotiate that fee in a purchase contracts. That's either here or there. But paragraph 3, protection period. This is not in the rep sheet. And I don't know that this is the strongest thing in the world, but it exists. It sets some precedents. If within, and it would be, for me, it would be 6 months after this commission agreement is entered into, the property is acquired by the buyer or anyone acting on the buyer's behalf, the seller agrees to pay the company the brokerage fee stated in section 2. The seller agrees to exempt the buyer upon entering into a valid listing agreement with another brokerage. So there you go. You got a protection period there, and it does prevent some shenanigans that might otherwise occur. So you do have some protections there. And again, how strong that is, I guess, depends on how motivated the people are to make sure you don't get paid. Usually they're not that motivated. Seller warranties and disclosures. Again, you have nothing. I mean, you do have some of this stuff in the Rep C, but I think this paints it out more clearly, and you get an opportunity to sit down with the seller and go, by the way, the seller warrants that individuals or entities listed above the seller represents all of the record owners of the property. The seller warrants that it has marketable title and an established right to sell, lease, or exchange the property. The seller agrees to execute the necessary documents and conveyance. The seller agrees to furnish the buyer with good and marketable title and to pay its settlement for a standard coverage owner's policy of title insurance. The seller agrees to personally complete and sign the seller's property condition disclosure form. Maybe we could get to that in the Rep C, but I think it's important that they understand that stuff. This is also really important. Agency relationships. By signing this commission agreement, the seller acknowledges and agrees that the agent and the principal broker for the company are representing the buyer. As the buyer's agents, they will act consistent with the fiduciary duties to the buyer, and the seller acknowledges the company agent has advised the seller. The seller is entitled to be represented by a real estate agent. So there you go, agency relationships. I think it's a big deal, and I think we need to have those discussions anyway if we're representing for sell by owner, and this is a good way to have them. There's a part on here about professional advice and that we are not really going to give them any professional advice, and if they want it, they need to go find professionals. Dispute resolution, seller's authorizations. This is also important. Can we put it on the MLS? And we do want to put this on the MLS. I think it's good for the real estate agent ecosystem to have all this data available to us. And here we're getting permission to put it on the MLS. And it also reminds the seller of equal housing and that they are bound by those laws as well. But I think this is a pretty good document to get signed beforehand and negotiate it, because I think it does, it sets the table for communication, your relationship with this seller, because you got to have some type of relationship with them. But anyway, what say you? Has anybody used this form lately? Are you not using the form? If so, why not? If you are using the form, if so, why? What say you, Berkies?
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? I'm hiking right now. But with regard to putting it on the MLS, are you implying that the buyer's agent is able to put it on the MLS?
Yeah. So that's what that paragraph is specifically getting permission to disclose this on the MLS. In this document.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've never seen that before. I, as a buyer with a FSBO, can fill out all the information to put it on the MLS.
Well, as a comp.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's pretty important. I mean, this might be a sidebar, but the Utah non-disclosure system, while well-intentioned, and I agree with the spirit of it, I don't think we actually live up to the spirit of our non-disclosure system. And so with that in mind, and this is just my own personal opinion, I feel like we're better served as the public for just having all this data available, like all the other states do. If we were truly non-disclosure, maybe I would be a lot more in favor of it. But as it is, I don't feel like we're truly non-disclosure. Anyway, I don't even know why we're talking about that. That's a bit of a tangent there. Anyway, does anybody have any questions on this document? Any experience lately? And also, let's face it, for sell by owners, the number of for sell by owners is decreasing and has been for quite some time. But I do think that, there's a real opportunity here for real estate agents, and because for sale by owners are decreasing, I feel like the skill of just talking to somebody and negotiating a deal without it being without it being an active listing, I think we need to exercise that a lot more, because establishing a relationship with these people and showing them that, hey, I know I don't represent you, but I'm here. I'm going to be honest and be straightforward and not be a jerk about it. It's a good way to potentially list something if your deal falls apart, right? But anyway, it's also meeting new people, establishing future relationships. The seller might need to buy something. Maybe they need a real estate agent to represent them in a future purchase. You don't know. But anyway, there's your form, and I would highly recommend everybody use that if they're negotiating for sell by owner deal, and not just default to writing your compensation in the purchase agreement. While it's doable, I don't think it's the best path forward. All right. Nothing else? Nothing else on that? Moving on. Moving on. Let's see. This is just a reminder because I feel like we need to cover this from time to time. If you are not aware, I think most of you are, but if you are not aware, this form is a Berkshire Hathaway form specific to us only. But this is basically an internal form that gives us, and as the title said, authorization to transfer or hold earnest money. And there are a few reasons why we would do that. Now, just so you know, earnest money trust accounts are actually highly regulated. And we can't just deposit regular old money in there for regular old reasons. Like, we have to have very specific reasons and permission to hold this money in our trust account. And so if, you know, and the traditional way is obvious that we get a contract and, you know, our client wants to deposit earnest money on that contract and they give it to us and we deposit it, right? But let's say that deal fails, but they're actively looking for another property and they just like, why don't you just keep that money? Well, we can if we get written permission to keep that money in our trust account. So the company and buyer parties to the certain buyer broker agreement. So we actually have to have a buyer broker agreement for them to officially be our clients, right? Buyer hereby authorizes the company to retain and hold earnest money in the amount of, in the company's real estate trust account under the following circumstances, check all that apply. A potential purchase transaction. Company and buyer have not yet identified a property that buyer would like to purchase. In anticipation of identifying a property, buyer is depositing or has deposited the earnest money into the company's real estate trust account to be held and used to negotiate a purchase once a property is identified. So there's one reason. Transfer from failed purchase transaction to identified potential purchase transaction. So that's sort of self-explanatory. And hold following failed transaction for unidentified potential purchase transaction. So you could check all three of those boxes. Maybe it makes sense to do that. But I think you should use this a little more strategically than, for instance, if your clients are traveling overseas or if they're not going to be available or they're going to, you know, hit a backcountry trail somewhere and their communication is bad, they can pre-deposit a certain amount of earnest money in order to make sure that we have it and we're complying with a potential transaction. All sorts of reasons why we should use this document, and I think some of us do use it, and but it's a really good tool. And you know, because if you know that you're going to put something else under contract, like, hey, we'll get that earnest money returned to you, and then a week later they got to go get send another wire or get another counter check or whatever, right? That can be a pain. And so if they're just like, you can just keep it. You're right, we can, with your authorization, with this document, we can keep your earnest money and move about the cabin. Anybody have any questions on that? Yeah, I didn't think so. All right, last document that we're going to talk about. I feel like you should just be aware of this because many people do not become aware of it until maybe it's too late. But 1031 exchanges. A 1031 exchange for the uninitiated or slightly confused. It's basically U.S. tax code, right? And it's a deferred tax system with the IRS, so you can defer your potential tax situation with the sale of a property to the future, and thereby leverage that and put it into another property. And we're not going to talk about the rules surrounding that. And you know, there's a million 1031 CE classes that you should definitely take to understand what the rules are. But in the meantime, just always refer to your local title company. They're going to have some 1031, 1031 specific entity that controls that, not the title company themselves, but handle your 1031 exchange money. But in the commercial contract, it's boilerplate language about 1031 exchange money and how it's handled. But in our residential purchase contracts, it's not. And you do need this language in your contract. So it's really simple language. So if they do, and by the way, this does not. There's been a lot of confusion about this. Not a lot, but I have had instances where we represent a buyer and a seller, mid deal is presented with this because they're like, hey, we've got to do a 1031 exchange. We need that document in place. And the seller's like, no, I'm not signing that. I don't know what the consequences are. And even with an education, they still refuse to say it was ridiculous. But we got to get this thing in place. So 1031 exchange, seller desires to enter into this transaction and sell the property as relinquished property under 1031 exchange of the Internal Revenue Code. Accordingly, buyer agrees to fully cooperate with the seller in completing the 1031 exchange at no expense or liability to buyer, or the buyer desires to enter into this transaction to acquire the property as a suitable like-kind exchange property under Section 1031 of the Internal Revenue Code. Accordingly, seller agrees to fully cooperate with the buyer in completing the 1031 exchange at no expense or liability to seller. Very simple stuff. It almost is surprising that it's required, but it's beyond me. Like, I don't know why I think you're just basically declaring before you enter into the transaction to just notify everybody if someone comes looking that, hey, this was my intention. Because you can't play fast and loose with 1031 rules. You have to, it's pretty strictly adhered to. And so I think they want this so they can just look back and say, yeah, that was their true intention. Now, you might be asking, well, what would the seller or buyer actually have to do in order to help them complete this? Also, another great question. If anybody actually has the answer to that question, unmute yourself and throw it in the chat, because in all my experience, I've never had the other party actually have to do or complete anything. And so it's just, it's slightly confusing to me. Linda asks, why is it not just called an acknowledgement? It's a really good question. I bet you, this is something that I've always wondered, but hadn't had the presence of mind to ask in the CE classes. Like, I've probably taken more than a dozen 1031 CE classes in my life, and I've never gone, why does someone have to cooperate? Like, they're not actually doing anything. So if you're not doing anything, why are you cooperating, and why do you need someone else's permission to do it? Doesn't make any sense to me. So here's to me maybe asking that question in the next 1031 class I take. So
Mike,
what's up?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Is it because maybe if they were to default and the money were not held with a brokerage, it would become a little bit stickier, maybe? I don't know. No, that doesn't make sense.
No, because when you sell your property, so whether you're a buyer or a seller, you have to deposit this money into basically a holding, right? Someone has to secure this money, and you can't have access to it. Like, if you just deposit the money from the sale in your bank account, you're not completing the 1031 exchange.
Accommodator.
Yeah. So and the accommodator, like, most people like to use the title companies because they're already there and they're really handy. I think the official IRS code is independent third party or something along those lines. I've seen some people out there play a cooler game with that. I don't know why, but they do. It's probably nefarious, who knows. But yeah, you can't have access to it. And so if you have access to it, you've broken the rules and it's not a 1031 exchange anymore. So you do have to, like, check the boxes as time goes on in order to complete this. So it's not as if, if the deal fails and you're still within your timing, you just go find another property, right? So yeah, I don't know that I understand it, but it's just required. There you have it. There you have it. Is it the money? Is it because the money is coming from a third party? Potentially. Um, Potentially. You know what? I'm actually going to find this out. I'm going to call the title person. Do we have any title people on with us? We don't. I'm going to call my title person and be like, "What's up with this?" And then maybe in the future I'll remember it and get back to everybody. But until then, just until then, that's just an FYI. All right. Anybody have any more questions on that? Has anybody done a 1031 exchange deal in the last 12 months?
Yes.
And did everything go okay, Bob?
Yes, but I think that, what they're trying to do here is acknowledge that timing is of the essence because there are times when the days get kind of tight and you need cooperation on both sides to meet that time.
Yeah, that could be it. Um, um,
Mike, I
yeah,
just
it could
did
easily
my
be.
own personal one.
Hmm.
Sold a commercial property in Idaho, purchased, rolled it into property in St. George, Utah. Most people, and most should know that you've got 90 days to identify a property. So we've done a few 1031 exchanges personally, and when we looked into it the very first time we did it, it says you need probably be wise to have two properties identified in case the first one goes south, because that's where people run into problems is they've just got the one and then all of a sudden either they kept it on the market because it was a 1030, they had to sell it, and then all of a sudden they've got to the end of their time and they don't have a second property identified, and so it becomes an issue. So people need to remember to educate the clients and recommend that they maybe have a second property as a backup so that they don't get into that panic mode and buy something just so they don't get dinged on taxes.
Yeah. And I've been party to several 1031 exchange deals, and that's true. Some people do get a little panicky in these situations. But the smartest people I've seen do this, of course, that identification period is crucial. They'll identify a lot of property. I've seen people identify like maybe a dozen different properties for them to explore. And then, if their first two choices don't work out, then they dig deep and see if those other, 10 properties that they identified might work out for them. So it doesn't cost, they submit a freaking Excel spreadsheet of the properties they're going to identify with their person, and then pray.
The other thing too is you don't have to just like you can split it up. So say that you want, it's just got to be like properties.
Mhm.
So you could purchase, you had a big purchase. You could we purchased a town or a condo. If we would have had enough money, we could have purchased three condos and that all would have been okay. People think they just can only purchase one property, and that is not the case. They can purchase more than one.
Yeah, you got to replace the amount you sold in order
Yes.
to avoid the penalty. Yeah, it is. It's an interesting game, um, and there's a lot of great benefits to it. But in my time, um, to me, this whole 1031 situation, I know everybody loves it as a tax benefit, right? But my perspective, this is a selfish perspective as someone who sells real estate, it has been the single greatest obstacle of doing deals of any other obstacle you could possibly imagine. Because people are like, no, I don't think I'll be able to replace the property. They could replace the property, but that's not what they're getting at. They're getting at, I want to defer 100% of my taxes, and so I don't believe I'll be able to do that. I get it, like it makes sense, but it's a big hurdle for moving commercial real estate. It's a huge hurdle, the biggest hurdle. Um, and it all makes sense. Like I get from their perspective why that would be important to them. But remember, it's deferred taxes. Deferred, meaning they're going to be paid. One day they're going to be paid. By who and when, I guess, is the biggest thing. So anyway, anybody else have any other comments, anything to add there before we move on? All right, moving on. Hey, I want to talk about how many people on here were on the Zoom meeting? Let's see, the Tuesday Zoom meeting that I conducted. Anybody? Bueller? Anybody on that meeting? Well, anywho, actually, if you weren't on the meeting, it's a little better for me because then I can cover some stuff that I covered there too. And okay, let's see here. Oh, sorry, folks. Technical difficulty. Okay, we do have some people that were on that meeting. A couple of things I want to talk about that that have occurred to me because I've been looking at these slides and reading that report. And for the uninitiated, a lot of the information I shared was from the results of some surveys that were done by the company called 1000 Watt. And you can Google them and kind of find out what they do. But BHHS Corporate nationally hired this company to do some pretty extensive research on sellers and what they're thinking and the things that are important to them. And as I said in the sales meeting, some of that stuff I think we've known and operated around for a while. Some of it not so much, but I think it's a really cool perspective. As I've been thinking about it more, I think some of the things that our industry and maybe even we as a company can improve on with some of our marketing is one thing that I think that we did really well with the buyer's guide is that we laid out a timeline, right, of a transaction, and in that timeline, through our marketing efforts, we outlined all the hurdles that were in place that could possibly affect them succeeding, buying a home. We told them about the inspections, what to prepare for, getting pre-approved. We talked about their finances. We talked about how we get paid. It was a really good timeline of events for that category. And we are very attached to our listing presentation, and we've got a great listing presentation. And very intentionally, we've said, listen, agents have an almost uncountable number of ways in which they prefer to go do a listing presentation. And so to some degree, we're leaving it up to the agents to take what we've made and make it their own, which is what I've been telling everybody to do for quite some time. But I do think maybe we can add a couple pages in there that more closely reflect some concerns or issues that maybe we should be addressed when we set expectations as listing agents. And that's kind of the what I want to talk about is setting the expectation and how we should actually do that. So I'm going to share my screen. Some of you will definitely remember this from sales meeting, but we're going to talk about it a little more in depth here. So you should see the Basecamp Sea of Same the slide. The reality check, because they cannot tell agents apart, 75% hire the very first agent they meet. That's some information that I think we've always known. And what contributes to that? By the way, these are a lot of people they interviewed that actually did complete transactions. So that was their audience, people who are actually selling homes. And it's just sellers, not buyers. The confusion, 47% state I wasn't really sure what to look for in an agent. 29% reported that all real estate agents seem the same to me. And another third find choosing an agent highly stressful. And the younger you are, 24 to 34, that number actually spikes. And you can see why. Like that makes a lot of sense, because if you want to hire somebody, because there's a whole mindset where I can do it myself. I don't need a real estate agent. Okay, we navigated that issue as an industry for quite some time, and I think we're pretty good at navigating that. But there's the vast majority of people, 90+%, are saying, I want to hire a real estate agent to help me navigate this process because it's incredibly important. There's a whole bunch I don't know about the market. things to look out for, all the nuance and context that occur within a real estate deal. I don't know that. That's why I'm hiring a professional. So it's an incredibly big part, an important part of their lives, and they want to hire the right person. And what they're saying is, for half of them say, I don't really know what I'm supposed to look for. Okay. I think that's kind of a problem, but I think if you address it, I think your chances of winning a listing go up dramatically. So let's talk for a second about in the chat or unmute yourself. How many people here in their listing presentations are you addressing the inspection period? Are you talking specifically about negotiations and what happens, what they should expect during negotiations? Or are you, because I could see another scenario in which, listen, I'm talking about, why you should hire me. I'm an expert in my field. I know the marketplace. We're going to talk about pricing. Which direction are you taking your listing presentations? And do you feel like covering two-parter? Do you feel like covering, the hurdles of selling their home, which is sort of the after effect after they hire you? Do you feel like covering that later? Tara says, I suggest a pre-existing inspection, best to know ahead of time what could come up. That's a controversial subject, Tara. I don't know if you know that's controversial. So yeah, there's that. Yeah, go ahead.
I actually show them the due diligence resolution addendum and talk about it, because I think they need to know what's probably going to be coming their way. And
Yeah.
it shows you solving a problem and how they can negotiate through that. Knocks down that worry right off the bat.
I think that's actually a great idea, because that addresses, let me find this other slide, that directly addresses some of their issues, some of what people are reporting as their issues. So here we go. Let me just share this slide. It kind of covers exactly what you're talking about. So to a large degree, what sellers are saying is that, I want an advisor. I don't want a transaction manager. Like, I want to hire a real consultant who gives me perspective on the entire thing, not just someone to handle the transaction. Okay. So 20% felt entirely unprepared for the pressure of negotiation. Inspection anxiety. 19% were blindsided by the emotional stakes of the inspection. And 16% struggled deeply to reconcile practical decisions with emotional attachment. So there you have it, right there. And I think, Linda, your strategy of sharing a very common document to resolve the inspection and resolve a key point in a lot of negotiations, and talking about it up front is a great way to ease that anxiety. And here's the thing that I think makes it even more important. We all know it's coming, right? I mean, we do list houses and we go through the inspection and we hear back, hey, inspection went great. We're relieved for that, right? There's a sense of relief when we hear those words, but I don't know that that's the most common scenario. So if we know that's coming, if we know that's coming down the line, we should address it head on before they even see it.
With the buyer and the seller, with both of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think one of the places that we can improve as an industry is just a personal skill level is our negotiation strategies. And I think you can think through them. I think you can think through it and be prepared in advance to have some strategy. And if X doesn't happen, we go to Y. And if A happens, that automatically triggers B, right? We should be a little more heads up about our negotiation strategies. And part of that is preparing the people that actually have to make the decisions about the consequences of their decisions. Because they don't, there are times where, that inspection report comes back and it's a doozy, and their anxiety level goes through the roof because, replacing an HVAC unit in July is not fun. Even if they can afford it, even if it's no big deal, which is kind of rare, right? Most people see that bill and their stress level just shoots through the roof. And while we're not the source of it, we are the source of the solution. Like they see us as the source of the solution. So I think that's important. And let's go back to Tara's comment. And she said again, I suggest a pre-existing inspection. Best to know ahead of time what could come up. The pre-listing inspection. So to give everybody some perspective, I said, well, that's a little controversial. I would say that there's some perspective out there that getting the pre-listing inspection could create problems. Well, basically what it does is it could make the seller aware of a whole host of problems they were unaware of before, thereby making their seller's disclosures more significant in a situation in which they might otherwise not be. And it also may subject them to repairs that the buyer may not care about, or all, you kind of see where that's going. The argument for it, and Linda said that the can of worms that some don't want to open. I think those are all true. The argument for it, though, is that you are, even though you may not address those problems head on, the person is aware of them ahead of time. The anxiety and the stress of that is dealt with now, before we're in the middle of a contract. We know potentially what's coming down the line. And we can, and also if we have to disclose stuff, we have to disclose stuff. We're doing that anyway. And Tara says in the chat, pricing the home correctly based on that. I think that's also helpful. My personal position on that is, I don't know if I would not fault any agent for doing that. That's just part of their process. I wouldn't fault anybody for making that decision. I think I would do it on a as needed basis. I think the rougher shape the home is in, like if there were key things that were in really rough shape, and I know it, and I'm not an expert, I would say we should probably deal with this and find out from a professional what's going on before we get into the middle of negotiations. Because I think there's certain items that we should be dealing with ahead of time. Because you get in the middle of negotiation and we just know, we know the furnace is going out. We know that all sorts of things that could come up, right? A couple of comments. Pete says, "Why create a mess before you have one?" Well, I think there's an argument to be made there. But sometimes maybe the analogy would be if there's a mess there and let's just say somebody spills a drink on the floor, okay? And then your kid spills the drink and your kid goes and grabs a towel and throws a towel over the spill. Well, we know the spill's there. We should deal with it ahead of time. That's my perspective on why sometimes those things are good to have it. Tony says, you don't need to sell yourself, telling people who you are, who you have worked for, how many years you have been selling real estate, sell your worth, tell them what you're going to do for them and how you were going to do it. Don't spend a lot of time talking about yourself. Concentrate on customer, client, and their needs. Love that. Tara, unmute yourself.
Okay,
What say you?
So I can see the pro and con for both. There's always going to be something that comes up on an inspection report, and sometimes even for a seller, it's a surprise they didn't know about. And I always tell my clients, this is just something I suggest. You guys don't have to do it. But would you rather be able to negotiate the repair and find out what needs to be done and address it on your timeline instead of having to do it in the heat of the emotions and given maybe only a 24 to 48 hour, advance to decide what to do. And sometimes we have found really big issues. One of my inspectors found an issue with a roof, found that there was some weather damage, and my seller was just, he knew that there was a problem with the roof, but the insurance covered the roof. And it was because we had the inspection report and it covered like $28,000 for that roof. So that was a huge win. And it's never fun to go on the market, find out that you have problems, and you go under contract, and then that buyer backs out. It's never great.
Yeah, I think Tara, that's a strong argument for your position. Because think about the handling these things in the middle of a transaction is there's no worse time to handle them. And I know we do it all the time. We handle some big problems in the middle of a transaction. It's doable, but it's very, very stressful. And we do know at times that we all have had the experience where those things fail. Those things fail because of those issues, right? So really, just remember your job. And by the way, the reason I'm sharing this report is to set expectations and help minimize what their primary concerns might be, right? To address them ahead of time. And I can see. Listen, I genuinely can see both sides of this argument, and I'll just repeat. I think Tara, if whatever's working for you, keep doing it. Like, don't back away because of anything I said. I think your own personal experience should be good enough. I would actually deal with these things on an as needed basis. And if the home is in really rough shape, I think I would probably say let's get an inspection done because there's going to be a lot of stuff that maybe we can address ahead of time, and we may only have one shot at this because there's no
Hey,
other
Mike,
way to handle it. Yeah.
I've seen, I wouldn't do it personally for a typical seller, but I've seen it. I used to work with a lot of flippers, and the listing agent had it done because they knew they were going to get multiple offers from flippers. And the last thing they want to do is not disclose all the major issues because now you don't have to deal with concessions. And hopefully that first buyer under contract is far more likely to close.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Um, Linda says some inspectors can just about tank a deal, health and safety versus nitpicky, educate and guide, both sides to be reasonable. Yeah, I think there are plenty of inspectors in every market that are known as deal killers. They just are. And, um, and I know from there, like I can hear them talk about it already. It's like, well, I'm here to, it's not the listing agent to hire me and they just want a clean, smooth deal so they can get paid. Like I can hear them right now about the things that they're saying. But the bottom line is there's a real difference between being the person who's going in there, uh, creating massive problems where there are only just regular problems. I think that's maybe the differentiator. Tony says, just remind the client that inspection is not a to-do list. It is simply to inform the buyer and seller on the condition of how. Yeah, great point. And I mean, usually half of those inspection reports are you need a new light plate cover. Maybe replace that switch because it's jiggly. I mean, they do stuff like that. And but if we think about that and we have that conversation with them, and like think of the massive difference in our client's perspective of how good we are at our jobs when we go, by the way, you're going to, when this goes under contract, as a seller, you're going to get an inspection report that might look pretty scary, right? They might even share the whole thing with us. That's totally normal. They're going to talk about light cover switches. They're going to talk about, a jiggly faucet handle. They're going to talk about stuff that you've just been living with fine for years, and now all of a sudden someone is saying that this is a problem. Don't worry about it. The other people won't see that as a problem either. Having that discussion, I think, is the biggest issue that you need to handle. Let's see here. Let's talk about the other thing that we talked about that I want to spend a little more time on. Maybe this is the last subject. The marketing expectation that we're having with our clients. I think the vast majority of our sales, we can all say, listen, most of our sales come directly from the MLS and other real estate agents. And so when we talk about marketing and you're like, well, hey, I can do some social media ads and I can do some chalk digital ads and I can, do this or that, but it's not very meaningful because, they're going to be represented by a real estate agent and the real estate agent is going to set their buyer up on a hot sheet and they're going to see the right property come by and that's what they're going to do. And I think generally speaking, that's correct. But remember, I talk about this all the time. There's only one thing that we claim to be experts at in our listing agreement, and that's marketing. We're experts at marketing. We specifically say that. And so if that's the case, as well as I do, like to me, the best example is the best at marketing. Bear with me now. Used cars, okay? Like how many times have you gone and looked at a beautiful used cars and it's like under the hood, it's a disaster. But the photos online and the angles they take of that car and everything else, and they have this beautiful description, you're like, wow, I would love to own that car. So the point is that the marketing can play a massive role in people's desires to actually come set foot in your house. And I think we all know that. And the number one way that we know that is because we look at a lot of real estate and a lot of photos, and every single one of us scoffs at the person who just listed $1 million home and took photos with their cell phone. And they're not a photographer. And not only do they take them with their cell phone, because, hey, my cell phone takes amazing photographs, they have horrible angles. They don't know how to set up a shot. They don't know how to present the home correctly. We've seen it a million times. So we know as to the core that marketing makes a big difference, okay? It does make a big difference in people's desire to actually come walk through a home. So don't forget that. I highly recommend that you go through, I highly recommend that everybody here, if you haven't already, I think things that can help you win this listing is set up in your listing presentation, a marketing commitment letter. We have some templates that you can use and alter them and make them your own and talk about the marketing efforts that you're going to go through. And listen, I know several real estate agents that have very specific marketing things that they do. And to a T, all these people that I'm talking about, they got a lot of business going and they still stick to everything, they commit to doing an open house. They commit to putting it here. They commit to X number of social media posts a week, right? They make a very specific commitment to what marketing efforts they're going to do and how often they're going to do them. Because in this report, one of the things this report found, and maybe I can, here, I'll share a couple of these with you. Some of the things that they found is that the clients basically say, I like my real estate agent. 30% of sellers hired their agent specifically for marketing, but only half of these highly motivated sellers rated their agent's marketing as very well. More than half left without the performance they expected. The sellers who care most about marketing grade it most critically. They notice gaps, missed tactics, and quiet weeks. Okay? So, and the reason I bring that up is because, well, I think all of us here want to be referral agents, right? We want a lot of return customers. And if we want a lot of return customers, one of the ways we do that is, in my opinion, if we get a listing, we make some, we don't have to go outlandish marketing commitments, but we should make some really good marketing commitments, and then we deliver, and then we report every single week. And so when I see, and that last thing, they notice gaps, missed tactics, and quiet weeks. Let me just say this, not contacting your seller every single week, I think you're missing a huge opportunity to establish and maintain a great relationship with somebody. Because if a property is sitting for an extended period of time, if you've talked to them every single week, the odds that you're going to maintain that listing and, more importantly, that relationship will increase dramatically. If you're missing a week or two, if you've missed 2 weeks without communicating in a stagnant market, man, all bets are off. I can't imagine that you're going to get any referrals or any kind of future business from this person. And it's understandable, right? So I think if I'm going to encourage or challenge anybody here today, it would be to reassess where your listing presentation is. And that marketing commitment letter, I know you're just like, well, I just explained everything to them in my listing presentation. But the marketing commitment letter kind of feels like a contract in a way, in a different sort of angle. It's much more specific about what I'm going to do. Week 1, I'll do this. Week 2, I got this. I'm going to do an open house. I'm going to knock some doors in the open house. I'm going to do this. And after 30 days, I'm going to reset. I don't care what the plan is, as long as it's fairly consistent and then you execute. I think that's the most important thing. Does anybody have any comments, suggestions? Do they disagree?
I have one. I always talk too much, I feel like.
Nah, take it away, Linda. I get sick of hearing myself talk.
So you can send the analytic reports from the social media postings and from the MLS. And I think those are really cool. They're also really good to show, like, okay, we had a lot of clicks and views and interaction, and we had showings, but maybe it dropped off. So it's good for the negotiating a price reduction if needed.
Mm-hmm.
It's not you saying it, it's them already seeing what you're sending them anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a really easy thing to do. And by the way, Remy, to me, has the most easily accessible and most complete reporting tool for online views that we have now. So the way that it's in there is, you would go in there and do a CLA report of your existing listing, right? And then about 3/4 of the way through the report of your own listing is the views, and it has them all. It has Zillow, Realtor, BHHS. Actually, what I think it's doing is just pulling the top 5 or 6 sources, which could be any number of things. But it'll create a graph for you. It'll create a bar graph and a line graph. And so, at a minimum, I think, if you're in a hurry and you're like, man, I can't create the normal report, you can at least go to Remy on your phone, refresh the listing that's already in there, scroll down a little bit, see those numbers, make a phone call, and just say, hey, I'll follow up with you on Monday, but I just wanted you to know that your listing views fell off a teeny bit this week. We're expecting it, but they still, in my opinion, seem strong because of X, Y, and Z. So also we had 3 inquiries and 1 showing request, as you might remember, on Tuesday. Like that, to me, good enough. Like, you can do better. You can do better reporting. Maybe maybe we put together a nice email that's a template, and we already have that template for you. You can just input some numbers. But also, the CLA report, it's shareable to your clients. Like, you could just set the expectation and give them a phone call. Just say, hey, just following up. It's Friday, and here's a few things that have happened. And as I told you, I'm going to share this link with you because it does give you some updates on some stuff that's going on. You can pare down and not include a lot of the stuff on the CLA report and just the stuff that you want your client to see. And you could share that link with them and they can view it on their phone. I think that's pretty good reporting too. And to me, that speaks to like organization. And I have a process and I have a pattern in which I work through every day. Those are the things that I think will inspire some confidence in your client. So I highly encourage you to do it. Any other questions, comments, suggestions? Last time we ended, I do believe I told everybody to jump on the U.S. soccer bandwagon. My apologies. Horrible timing for you to have jumped on the bandwagon if you just jumped on it last week. But anyway, just going to apologize for that. And it's 1:57. And if nobody has anything else, I think we're going to call it a huddle. All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming. We'll see you next time.